What do you all think about where purpose sits in your strategy?
We designed technology to better serve humankind, and that changed everything. And the big moment for us when COVID all of a sudden happened, we were like, okay, what do we do? Well, we need to think about our purpose statement. And we started building prototypes and technology to help people and governments with COVID.
I'm so proud of the team that we have. I can hand on heart say, we live that purpose every single day, internally as an organization or with clients when we're doing setup or retros, and it's just the most fundamental thing.
Most of the people that joined the company joined for the purpose of using tech to save the oceans, and now we brought in external capital, and not all of those new shareholders necessarily aligned as tightly with that as maybe the team. I think the challenge we have right now is just as we grow to a 10x bigger than we are now, how can we deliver that purpose at scale? So I'll probably come to all you guys for advice on how to do that.
What that's really about is building relationships, and if you can build relationships in a different way, that's where my focus is now, regardless of where people are or what else is going on. The importance of building relationships and communicating well will get you through a lot of those more difficult bits.
What was your F-year moment that you were like, I can't believe I achieved that, or we achieved that as a team?
Oh, no surprises for me. It's completely all about the...
Kia ora everyone, I'm Troy Hammond and you're on Talent Army Table Talk. This is a podcast where we bring 4 exec leaders around the table to have a conversation about their jobs, to discuss some really interesting topics that happen at their level of opportunity and role, in their industry, in their domain, and we seek lots of questions from the audience, from you, so thank you so much for those that have sent in questions. You're going to be really happy because on today's episode, we're finally doing 4 CEOs. And so let's get around the table and see who we've got on Table Talk today.
Kia ora, I'm Sarah Gillies. I'm the Chief Executive of the Electricity Authority, which is the market regulator for electricity. So we regulate the electricity market for the benefit of consumers in New Zealand.
G'day, I'm Trent Fulcher, CEO of Starboard Maritime Intelligence. And we effectively take data from satellites and other sources and find vessels in the ocean and look for risks to either sovereign borders or look for things like illegal fishing, damage to subsea cables. New Zealand-based company. We got a distributed team around the country.
Congrats on all the recent wins at the High Tech Awards as well.
Oh, Thank you.
Trent.
Yeah, grateful.
Yeah. Kia ora, I'm KP. I'm the Chief Executive at Humankind. We're Aotearoa's largest people and culture advisory company, and we're very much driven by our purpose, which is to bring humanity to work. But what we do is really partner with our clients to help them to perform. And prior to joining Humankind, I was a director at big North American retail giant Aritzia LP and was on the senior leadership team there that helped to lead Aritzia to the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Kia ora, Pavan Vyas. I'm the Chief Exec at Flick Electric. Flick's a modern technology-based independent energy retailer. And I wear some other hats as well. I'm on the board of Netball New Zealand, a small little tech startup called Frankie, as well as digital services studio called Rush Digital, which I was previously CEO at as well. So good to be here.
Well, thanks so much for coming. I know it's hard as a CEO to find time in your diaries to sit around and have a chat. And so I'm really thankful and appreciative that we've got 4 of you around the table today. And so I thought I would jump into like a really tricky question straight away, just because that's how I roll, sorry. But it's not that tricky. We've got a lot of people that listen to this podcast because they're looking to become an executive leader. And so, Pavan, I thought I'd start with you. Like, what's thinking about now that you're a CEO, sometimes it's like, be careful what you wish for in these opportunities and roles, but obviously you guys are in great roles. What's something that you didn't expect about like taking on responsibilities as a chief executive? What was something that you were like, oh, I didn't think about that before I took the role?
Yeah, great question. Look, the one thing I vividly remember in my first CEO role was way back in 2016. It's one of those roles where you're always something's going to break every single day, or something's going to go wrong every single day. Because when you lead an organization, you're responsible and accountable for the whole thing. And it took me about 6 months to get used to that. So kind of how do you have the ability to detach yourself from the problem that's emerged so that you can actually solve it. And you got to be ready for something going wrong every single day. And that's just part of the job.
How do you detach yourself? How do you do that? Talk me through that.
I think it's different for everybody. For me, it's about thinking about the problem in the first principles, and my job is the problem solver, and enabling other people to solve the problem as well. So you should not take it personally even if it's your F up, because ultimately you're ultimately accountable for taking organizations through whatever you might be confronted with. So that's how I kind of intellectualize the problem versus really let it control me.
Can I give a perspective on that question?
Yeah, please.
Having worked in kind of senior leadership roles in kind of multinationals and now startup CEO, one thing I really notice is in those senior roles, and you might be able to relate with your experience back in the States.
Canada.
North America. If you
That's the
are,
first time I've seen that in the reverse, actually.
it's going to get awkward now. As a senior business leader in a corporate, your success and failure falls on you, and you get the credit for it. If you get the successes, whereas a CEO, you don't often get the credit. The team gets the credit, which they should, but quite often the CEO's left out. And just an example, last year we raised funding in a really difficult funding environment, got that done. And it was just like, all right, we'll just keep moving. I'm like, hang on, that was a year of my time, and that was really, really hard. And so I just had to suck it up and know that as a CEO, it's for the best of the company, and you just do it. You don't always get all the kudos you want, as you might do in a more senior role in a corporate. And that's a big difference I've noticed.
Hey, KP, I might throw it over to you for the same question, because you had the, Pavan, you did too, actually, like jumping in to be a CEO when the founder was still in the business. That I know I've had people try and run my business and they hated it, but sounds like you've done a much better job.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, we've been really lucky at Humankind because, Sam and I had the opportunity to work together for quite a long period of time. And we've got a really strong foundation of shared values and also a really strong appreciation of how complementary we are. We are very different. We have really different strengths that we bring to the table. But I think what really underpins that is we both have, we both invest a lot in our own leadership and kind of level of self-awareness. And so she is really clear on what she's good at and what she's not good at. And I'm really clear on what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. And that's really been the absolute foundation. Absolutely, we hit our peaks and troughs, and that sometimes happens weekly, monthly. Sometimes it feels like it goes ages without that happening. But at the end of the day, that's absolutely what really underpins it.
Was there a moment that you had to put your foot down and say, all right, this is my ship that I'm steering now? Or because it's hard, like I know from my personal point of view, it's hard to let go sometimes, when you're the founder and you let a CEO come in and you really want to, but sometimes you need that CEO just to step up and take it. And so was there a moment that you remember where you had to say, okay, I'm in charge now? Yeah,
and really not just saying this, I have to give Sam credit. She has really given me a lot of autonomy in that space. And even, I see our role at Humankind, that's actually one of the highest leverage things that we can do is really help founders to understand when it's time to let someone else take the reins. So I really give Sam a lot of credit. It's that whole concept, what gets you here doesn't get you there, right? I am not a founder. The entrepreneurialism, that's not my strength. I'm really good in the next stage around really scaling the business, the culture, the operations. I guess back to your question, was there a time that I've had to really put my foot down? Absolutely. And there's times that she's had to put her foot down with me. Yeah.
Awesome. So on strengths, Sarah, I think everyone that I meet who is a good exec leader has a bit of a superpower of some description. And so what would be your superpower or your real strength that you rely on?
That's a good question. I think it's not that I'm saying I've got lots of superpowers, but it's hard to think of one thing because I think there are lots of things you need to do as a leader. I'd say probably the thing I try and do is be really kind of open and transparent with my team and with anyone I work with about what's going well and about what's not going well. So rather than kind of being distant and sort of waiting for the right opportunity, but having constant conversations about what's going well so that you can keep adjusting and keep improving, I guess, as you travel, rather than, kind of waiting until there's some magical point to kind of give feedback. I think that's part of it. I suppose the other thing I think that I try and do is keep learning. And I think when you're always kind of looking for what you can learn, that also helps you keep adjusting what you're doing.
I think I might just add to that. Sarah and I have worked in many guises before, and being an electricity retailer and you being the regulator, I think one of your superpowers is actually the ability to listen and have those relationships in place so that we can actually have a interesting and difficult conversation in a really really good, constructive way. And that's something that I think the sector has lacked before you took over. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that's right. It's that relationships are everything in leadership, really, because mostly our kind of main asset in a business is people. So if you don't manage relationships well, you're not, getting the best out of your people, which is probably what KP sees a lot as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got quite a firm view, and this was a real learning for me. Like, the world is relational. It's not transactional. And when that framework clicked for me, a lot was unlocked as a leader in our organizations, in life.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've been reflecting on is that, and it seems really obvious, but the thing about leadership is it is about leading, and you've got to spend a lot of your time actually thinking about leading people. And like I say, that sounds really obvious because
What's the difference for people that don't know the difference between leading people and managing people?
I think a leader has to have, I was thinking about this, a leader is trying to take you from somewhere to somewhere else. And so you've got to know where you're going, and you've got to kind of chart that course or, forge that path for people. And if you're not doing that, then you're not really shifting the dial or getting any progress. And that actually was quite a surprise to me, I think, because I'd done lots of leadership roles before, but actually thinking about that was quite a difference.
Just to add to that, and this has really kind of dawned on me in the last kind of 12 months, is the number one role as a leader, as a CEO leader, is to set the vision for the company and then communicate and align your people around that vision. And it's so easy to just get busy in the CEO role. And I don't know if people can relate to this, but if you're doing your job effectively, you're not doing other people's jobs, and even things you're really, really good at, like selling or capital raising, whatever it is. But if you're not doing the core of setting that direction, getting people aligned, aligning the business around it, then that to me is job one. And then once you do that, you can get involved in other things.
Yeah.
I often talk to people, and as a recruiter, I hear people at their lowest points, right? And so you can imagine they come to me when they're looking for a change because they're disgruntled or whatever. And I always hear the common thought, my CEO doesn't do anything, or he or she is like, visionary but doesn't actually do anything. And I often sit down and say, look, that's the job of the CEO, is to be across everything. So you can't be deep in any particular thing. And so if they're visionary, I think they're probably doing a great job.
Yeah.
How do you show people though, like in a business, how do you effectively say, hey, this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm trying to help?
I can start back in my Canadian days. I remember a part-time employee coming up to me, and I used to travel to different regions around the country, and she's like, I haven't seen you in like 3 weeks. Like, are you still working? I was like, you work like 2 days a week, right? Like, I'm literally working around the clock. Like, and so that's exactly how it feels. And you just have to laugh at those things. But I mean, my initial response is like, people just won't see everything that you do, and that's okay. I completely agree with what you said, Trent. Like, our role is to set the vision and strategy first and foremost, and then really bring people along on that and help to develop the team and develop people to be able to really deliver on that and reach what they're capable of. But just the reality is that people won't see everything that you do, and you just have to be okay with that.
Well, I think the nuance there is, and I'm guilty of doing this, is you kind of get into your little tower there and do really great strategy work and vision work, and nobody sees you for weeks. And I think involving people in that journey, so involving your leadership team in that journey, because I've got a few good ideas, I think, but they've got so many more ideas, and I want to involve them in that journey. Then I want to involve my board in that journey, and then ultimately I want to involve my broader team in that journey. And by doing that, I think that also kind of helps with, now I get what this guy does. He's not just the ideas guy. He's the facilitator and the connector. So I found that helpful as well.
But I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think you're right though about you do need that vision, and that, great chief executives I've worked for have really had that vision. But I think, like KP was talking about earlier, they've surrounded themselves with people who complement them. So I worked in a multinational, incredibly visionary chief executive, but he had people around him who did the more kind of structured and kind of organisational stuff to kind of balance that vision, and that was really effective.
I think the reality is all of us tend to lean towards one or the other. Like, you're kind of stronger at the strategy and the visionary, or stronger at the team piece, like those being the two key aspects of the role. And this is my view. I'd love to know what all of yours are. Like, we can develop those strengths. I lean towards, the team piece and the capability piece, and moving from a multinational to a smaller startup where you have to do everything. I've really enjoyed really flexing my muscle and developing in the strategy piece. But yeah, we all tend to kind of lean towards one or the other. And then you need people around you that are strong in different ways. And then that's the fun, is that you get to learn. But what do you all think?
In this current role, because I came into this role not knowing anything about this sector, and I've learned and coming up to speed, setting a compelling vision for the company and understanding where the real opportunities are long term, I rely a lot on my head of product, who's deeply entrenched. And I think how I can support that is once he's got some clarity around what that vision looks like, I can then package that vision, put it into a strategy, align the team, and then go sell that vision to the market, sell that vision to customers. So I don't try to be the idea guy necessarily at the moment, because I know that I'm not as strong as I need to be, but he's great at it, so we collaborate and do it together.
I'm curious on your thoughts, because you two guys have both worked in sort of quasi head of strategy type roles, right? How do you think, like, if someone doesn't have that strategy role in their career before being a CEO, how do they learn that?
Well, just think back to the bank days, and banks are always fun to do these kind of things because there's lots of egos around the table. One of the banks I worked at here, quite a visionary CEO, but also kind of a bright, shiny CEO where, just kind of went from shiny object to shiny object. And so part of my role was to help provide insight and really an awareness of opportunities and threats to the broader leadership team and the board to make informed, intelligent decisions as opposed to bright, shiny decisions. And so I think that's just helped me that I'm quite an optimistic guy. I can get excited about new things, but I need to take a step back and say, well, let's make sure we're really ruthlessly going through and making sure this is real or not. And also getting people around me with black hats and other perspectives that can challenge it.
Yeah, I think for me, strategy, especially for people that are not used to setting strategy, is about making really clear choices. And that's what you're going to do and where you're going to play and more importantly, what you're not going to do. So the exercise I've done with teams, including my own teams in the companies that I've been with, is spend about 3 or 4 months evaluating all the options and really understanding the choices and not boiling the ocean necessarily from a data and insights and analysis but the perspective. And once you boil down to the choices you're going to make, the visioning piece becomes a lot easier, because you can then turn that into a narrative, a story about what it might feel like winning in this sector, in this company, and how might it feel like turning up to work in the future in this company. So for me, I think strategy can be overcooked. I think corporates sometimes overcook it. So it's about kind of simplifying, and the process is probably more important than the outcome. So if you kind of can lay out, this is the process we're going to go through, and we may or may not end up in a different place, and involving your immediate team is kind of critical at that point in time.
It's interesting what you say about it's quite often you can have strategy overbaked in certain organizations, and I've definitely seen that. The strategy team can become its own institution, and that just ladens people with bureaucracy and process, which is not good. But on the other hand, I work for a CEO here who had a strategy function and people in it that were really, really smart, but he never listened to them. And he was a great guy, and I have a lot of respect for him, but he would just kind of go off and do his own thing. And I kept saying, well, why am I here? Because you're not listening. Oh, sorry. So it was almost like a confession that there was a weakness of him, that he needed to actually pause and listen to the smart people around him.
I loved what you said, Pavan, and totally agree with this. This has been part of my thinking over the last kind of couple of years, developing into the CEO role. It's like strategy is choices, right? And that kind of old saying around like, what's the difference between a plan and a strategy? I fundamentally think that's one of them, right? And then the other one is like really understanding, you said like, what's the vision, the winning aspiration, and then where are you playing? But like, who are the competitors, and really understanding your competitors and really analyzing that till you get to that kind of that sweet spot of like how we'll win or how we'll achieve that winning aspiration. But it all comes down to choices.
Yeah, the competitors point is really interesting, because I think in most industry this applies now. Like, your competitors might not be the obvious ones that exist today competing with you. It might be others that actually are trying to come into your industry or trying to disrupt your industry. So I think for me, competitor analysis is very important, but I think one should not just rely on that to inform the choices. I think what we need to think about is who else might come into your industry because they've got a fair chance to win using some technology or some sort of disruptive business models. For the folks listening, when we do competitive analysis, think about the curveballs that might come in. It's pretty important.
But also, I think, because my experience has been mostly in corporates and then shifting into government, doing strategy in government is kind of different again, right? You don't have any competitors to analyse, but you do still have to have a really firm idea about what is that future you're trying to drive for. And so,
how do you do that within the public sector?
Yeah,
when it's so variable depending on who gets into to government and strategy changing.
Well, I think the thing for me that's been really interesting to reflect on is most of my experience was in corporates and in technology businesses, and what I learned there was customer first, focus always on your customer. It's the same in government, really. You're focused on your consumer, the New Zealand public. We're focused on Kiwis. And if you think about that and what you want to enable Kiwis to do or be able to do, that kind of gives you a starting point, an end point, really, I suppose. Not so much worrying about competitors, but, in a sense, we're still using some of those same types of approaches and thinking, and it's really important because if you don't have that, then it's really hard to kind of, what are you here to do? What are you here to achieve? So you've still got to have that, and that's been an interesting thing for me, shifting from private sector to public sector.
What do you all think about where purpose sits in your strategy? Because that jumped out to me with your example, Sarah.
Yeah, I think for that's been a really interesting shift too with shifting into government, is that piece is a little bit easier in government because we are here for Kiwis, and that is very motivating for many people. That bit I think is a little bit easier. It's the kind of how we serve New Zealanders is sometimes a bit harder to figure out. Yeah.
For us, it's really important. In fact, most of the people that joined the company joined for the purpose of using tech to save the oceans and do good for the oceans. And it's an interesting dynamic because we grew to a certain point and brought on people that really aligned around that purpose, and then we brought in external capital, and not all of those new shareholders necessarily aligned as tightly with that as maybe the team, and they've got other ideas about maybe scaling the company and 10x returns and things like that. And so I think the challenge we have right now is connecting those dots between, as we grow to a 10x bigger than we are now, how can we deliver that purpose at scale versus just become a financially driven organization and forget about the purpose?
I think based on my experience at Rush, purpose was really important. So when I came to the company sort of didn't have a purpose statement or something that was well articulated. So we spent a bunch of time, probably 3 or 4 months actually. It might sound a lot of time, but we spent that much time thinking about what could be our purpose statement. We came up with redesign technology to better serve humankind, and that changed everything. The strategy flowed down from there. The people that we hired flowed down from that statement. The type of customers we wanted to work with. It was really easy to let go of customers to then grow the business off the back of that. And the big moment for us when COVID all of a sudden happened, we had overexposure into retail, into tourism, into travel, into all sorts of sectors which were impacted. And we had a whole bunch of this capacity sticking around. And like, okay, what do we do? Well, we need to think about our purpose statement. And we started building prototypes and technology to help people in governments with COVID, and kind of the rest is history when we won a whole bunch of government contracts. So I think for us, purpose was really important in a crisis as well as in the good times to kind of build the company off the back of that.
It's interesting you said you took quite a lot of time establishing that purpose, which felt like forever, but gosh, how important is that to get right? Because everything flew from it, as you said.
Huge.
For you guys it is too, I think, KP, isn't it? Because every time I hear you talk about Humankind, it is that you are purpose-driven or purpose-led.
In the
it's
name.
in the name. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And Troy, you asked around kind of founder-led to coming in, and I think, often the founder, the purpose absolutely starts with their personal purpose, right? And in our case it was, and for Sam, that was helping people to really love what they do. And that really took Humankind through its first really important phase. But one of the most pivotal things that we did as we, came together as that next iteration of the leadership team was to really spend time on that purpose, and similarly shifting from that to the next phase of really bringing humanity to work. That is absolutely why people join Humankind. And in services, we have so many great moments, and we have really challenging moments. We're challenging our clients. You're going out there, you get knocked around, you come back in. What really drives our team and keeps everyone going, it is that purpose. And I'm so proud of the team that we have. I can hand on heart say, we live that purpose every single day. There is not a day that goes by at Humankind that we're not reflecting on where we've lived our purpose, misalignments on where we're not living our purpose, whether that be internally as an organization or with clients when we're doing setup or retros, everything. And it's just like the most fundamental thing for us.
Do you have to kind of actively ask yourselves that question, or is it just something that's kind of in the DNA now?
I would say it's in the DNA. Like, I work with a lot of KP's team, and they're all just like, I was getting messages from Anna at like 7 o'clock last night, you know, like about this client, you know, that she wanted me to help with, and like saying, just because she was like, and I know you're really busy and I know you've got the podcast, I wanted to send it tonight so you could have some time to think about it. And I was like, I love you so much, you know, just like so lovely.
I do
people.
too. Yeah. Thank you.
Performance led, you know, like everyone should be here early, stay late. If you want to get a promotion and a pay rise, you need to be visible in the business and doing all these things. To COVID changed the world, to then now we're a lot more remote, to now how do you define what success looks like? How much trust do you as a leader now give? Because it went from a employer's market to an employee's market, to now it's probably coming back to 50-50. And so how have you all had to change your thinking and your roles, you know, as the world sort of changed around you?
You know, we've talked a little bit about the importance of relationships and communication, and I think those things they just become more important in those changing times. That thing about being visible or not being visible, what that's really about is building relationships. And if you can build relationships in a different way, you can still achieve that. Yeah. And I think that's where my focus is now, is, you know, regardless of where people are or, you know, what else is going on, the importance of building relationships and communicating well will get you through a lot of those more difficult bits.
What about yourself, Trent? You're obviously fully remote, your business.
Yeah.
How is it easier or harder to manage people remotely?
I don't think we've necessarily cracked it yet. So we have 30 people distributed around the country. We see each other once a quarter. We have like a get-together team days for a couple of days where we come in and spend a little bit of time at work, but a lot of time just FaceTime socializing and doing fun things. So I think that the technology supports good regular communication. We're really collaborative at a project and a team level. But in terms of driving and evolving culture, it's not ideal. And so, you know, the more we can get together, the better. And I think back to the earlier conversation about vision and aligning people around the vision, the tighter we are on that, I think that really helps, because then people are grounded in what's really important to the company and where it's going. And this continues to evolve, because now we're hiring people in North America, and you know, the ability to keep that model working when we've got different time zones is also going to be interesting. And then do we fly people in from overseas to our quarterly events? So we're still finding our way. I think at the moment it's working pretty well, but as we grow and scale, there'll just be some new challenges that we'll need to work through. So I'll probably come to all you guys for advice on how to do that.
KP, it's probably a good question to ask you. I imagine this is a question that comes up a lot in terms of how do you build great culture and how's culture changed? Has your leadership style had to change and adapt because of the market conditions?
Absolutely. I fully believe in like situational leadership, right? Different context calls on all of us to draw on different styles of leadership. I really believe in coaching, like leadership as a coach, right? That's developing our people, getting the best out of them. I really believe like people reach their highest potential in the face of high expectations and support. And also there is a time where we need to set the direction, and coaching isn't helpful. We need, to be decisive and make decisions, and people really learn from that as well. So absolutely my leadership style changes depending on the context. Right now, I think what's really important, kind of back to the piece around going from a really strong performance kind of environment to more employee focused. The opportunity that we all really have now is to hold on to the great. The time that was, low unemployment, that was really challenging for a lot of us as leaders and in business. However, those tough market conditions really forced us all to innovate. And ultimately having great workplaces, obviously, I believe actually really creates value for all stakeholders. So we have to hold on to that. And there has to be a handshake agreement, right? Attention to results, performance, that is absolutely better for everyone, including employees. So we've got a real opportunity now to hold on to both.
What's one thing that everyone wants to hold on to, and what's one thing that everyone wants to let go of?
For me, is holding on, we really believe, is design with your employees. And, you've all really alluded to this, like ask your team. They've got great ideas, and that's how you get diverse ideas, best ideas. Of course, we can't action all of them, but we can consider them and come up with better solutions for them. So that's definitely the thing that I really want to hold on to.
Yeah. Anything that you'd want to get rid of? Anything that you want to change?
Yes, lots. What about you all? What do you want to let go of?
Two things. What I want to do more of. One thing I noticed post-COVID is that I became insular is probably too strong, but because I work at home, I don't get out much. And I'm not out in the market, out in front of customers, out in front of suppliers enough. As we expand to North America, I need to be over there every couple of months and just really being in market and present, because that's how our customers buy. So I think being more present, not only internationally but domestically, is something that's really, really important. And just less reliance on Zoom meetings all the time, actually being face-to-face, because the magic, we go to a conference and walk out of there with 25 new leads for great opportunities. You just couldn't possibly do that on Zoom calls. So I think just getting out of that kind of a rut that COVID created, where we just sit behind desks all the time.
That's one thing that I'm really passionate about and that was why I was curious people's take on it. Is for me, the almost laziness of Zoom meetings now has become apparent. And as you probably know, I've been pretty vocal about getting events back together in Wellington and doing things, and the feedback that I've been getting from these events and things has been so amazing. People are like, oh my God, it's so great to meet my peers and friends and meet new acquaintances again. And I think a lot of us have just have become a lot more introverted because we're just hiding behind Zoom meetings, and it's easy to go, it's cold outside. I don't want to go out to an event tonight, but they are so powerful to go and meet people in person again.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that, being able to use technology in COVID and also, where people are working remotely is awesome. And that's given us lots of great things. But like anything, we don't want to overuse it and over-rely on it, because we lose the other benefits of, being together and that face-to-face stuff, and that's part of, we talked about your role as a leader in terms of bringing people together and aligning them around a purpose. It's a lot harder to do that if everybody's on Zoom and people are distracted. I think that's key.
We interviewed all the folks in the market and asked everyone that's working fully remote, if we were to have some contracts come up, would you take any while you're currently working, just so that we would know? Because we just wanted to test how many people were working outside, and it was very high.
Right.
Very, very high. And so I think it's changing a little bit now, but it's definitely been challenging over the last couple of years, how quickly it's sort of moving in both directions for employees and employers. But I like what you said, KP. There's so much good we can take from that and hang on to.
Yeah. The other big learning for me that our team told me is, I think with all of the shared knowledge now with technology, and we all have access to so much information, we're all hearing about all of the amazing things that every workplace is doing, right? But if one workplace is doing one or two amazing things, we hear about all of them. And then, I don't know about you all, but it feels like this pressure to do them all. And I really fell into that. And there was really a time where, in an effort to kind of meet those expectations, we were doing way too much, including for our team. But it actually became overwhelming and a bit of a distraction. And when we reconsolidated and got back to delivering humanity at work, helping our clients to perform and to achieve their missions, and doing some really key internal things that really matter to our team around learning, flexibility, team connection, their development, innovation, continuing to keep ahead, that's when we really started to fly again. And so actually trying to do too much, that's what I would let go of. It's back to choices, focus.
Yeah, and what you say no to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good, that definitely keeps a lot of people awake, and it's a beautiful segue into my next question, which is what's the main thing that keeps you awake in your role as a CEO, Pavan?
It's the main thing. Look, for me, it's about balancing the here and now versus the long-term future. So we've got a 10-year vision and a 5-year strategy and a 18-month or 2-year plan, which we're 6 months through it. And the long-term future is basically to continue to disrupt the energy sector using technologies and really lean on the mobility transition and the energy transition to help our customers think through what energy might do for their lives. What's the thing that keeps me up? It's that fine line, because on the one hand, we're fast-growing energy retailer that's serving around 40,000 customers in New Zealand, and we've got a hell of a mountain to climb in every single quarter, every single month, and we need our troops to completely focus on that. But at the same time, unearth these long-term opportunities that are going to create value for us, our customers, and our shareholders. And that's a dance which is really interesting, particularly in the context of the energy ecosystem right now, and especially with the government changing, and it's created an interesting playing field. So that's an interesting space to navigate, and keeping our people focused on what the prize is, whilst just doing good mahi day in and day out.
What about yourself, Sarah?
We're obviously in that same sector that Pavan's talking about. So for me, the energy sector, in particular electricity, is going through a huge change. And as a regulator, we need to be, enabling the future for consumers. And that's an awesome opportunity, but also a huge thing to be able to do. And so for me, I'm trying to change an organisation significantly to be able to work towards that future, balancing the kind of the amount of change that you make in an organisation at once to be able to, kind of not wear people out with all the change. But we know we have to change to get things to happen. So it's that balance, I think, of
Government always talks about innovation, like it's like a real buzzword, agile innovation. Scaled agile innovation. Can they innovate fast in the public sector?
Well, I think there's two things to that really. One is, like, I see our role as to enable the industry to innovate and to make sure that that's possible. We have to be ourselves innovative for government. To make sure that we're doing things differently. So it's kind of two levels of innovation, really. It's us ourselves doing things differently, but also in doing things differently, we will enable the private sector to be able to do all those great things. That's how I think about it.
Do you think people have been suffering a bit of transformation fatigue over the last couple of years?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's part of it too, isn't it? When we see that we need to do something differently, it's kind of tempting to think, well, let's just change things again. Sometimes you have to know when to kind of stick at it for a bit longer to see results, rather than just be tempted to tinker again. And I think that's quite hard as a leader, because often you see leaders come in and make changes because it seems like a quick fix, but it may not be the right thing to do. So how do you balance that, or how do you have that judgment to know, don't just keep changing things, actually, hold the line, stick to your guns for a bit, but also have something, that you're measuring that tells you, okay, no, it is time to make some changes.
I've got a bit of a build on that. Like, I completely agree with you both on the balance being between kind of like people and performance, but they're not exclusive. It's not the tyranny of or, it's and finding that sweet spot and seeing the whole picture. I think that's the challenge, and that's where the magic happens. But I've really been thinking about this over the last year, and someone in one of my peer mentoring kind of circles really helped me to see this. I was actually really finding myself worried about a change that I had to lead in Humankind, and thinking that exact thing. Our team are fatigued by this. And where she helped me get to quite quickly was like, that is our jobs now, is to lead change. Leading transformation, leading change, that is leadership. We serve our customers or the public, and that is changing all the time. Our customers' needs, our clients' needs are changing all the time. So as leaders, we're change makers. And that's the job.
I love that. In fact, my daughter asked me the other day, she's like, why do businesses always have to grow? I'm like, that's such a great question.
Yes.
And because the market doesn't stand still. Customers don't stand still. Employees don't stand still. So you're right. It's a constant state of change, or you get left behind.
And there's, to go back to what Pavan said earlier, there's so many companies that could be wiped out tomorrow by something that's being built behind the scenes that we don't know about, right? So if you're not thinking about changing, if you're not thinking about the innovation and growing, you're guaranteed to be disrupted.
Yeah. Well, Flick's a good example of that. You guys were a disruptor coming into the sector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we almost died 3 times along the way. So,
But you're still here.
But
yeah, and coming back to your question, I was very intrigued about innovation in government, because you have to build that failure muscle, right? You're gonna fail constantly, and that's very hard given the government and the political environment. So, so the question I have for the room is, what role do our companies play in driving innovation in government and helping almost our government stakeholders fail a little bit so that we can actually come up with a better system?
I guess another way of thinking about failure is just making mistakes, and maybe those are small failures, and I think that's one thing as a leader you can do is kind of speak about mistakes. So we had a situation where a mistake was made, and I ended up fronting the whole organisation and saying, I have made mistakes. I've been in that situation. I know what it feels like when you realise you've made a mistake, how horrible that is, and how much you beat yourself up. And that's okay. And if anyone is feeling really, really beside themselves about it, come and talk to me and I'll tell you about the mistakes I've made, and you can have a bit of a laugh, because that's how I've learned. And I think it's that concept of kind of, sure, you don't want to make a huge mistake, but you will make some mistakes, and that's what teaches you some things and builds your judgment. So, that's part of that failure, I think.
Pavan, some thoughts on your question, driving innovation in government. So our tool is used by quite a few of the New Zealand government agencies today, which is really awesome. And the perspective we've taken as we've engaged with different agencies is we're not just trying to sell you our software. We're trying to make you better analysts. And they're already great analysts, but we want to really continue to raise the bar. And so we've really invested in subject matter experts in maritime domain awareness analysis to get in and actually help upskill our government customers. And it's really bearing fruit. Not only are they more effective at what they're doing, and they're finding, identify more risks and being able to take more targeted action, but also, New Zealand as a country, they've got some really big strategic priorities in the Pacific around reducing illegal fishing and illegal crime. And so being able to kind of export the New Zealand government product around that whole area to the Pacific nations, we've been able to kind of help support as well. And so I think it can begin with, really good solutions, even at a individual employee level, and making them really great at their jobs and excel. And then it just kind of flows from there.
I've got an interesting one for you. So I've been talking to a lot of government CEOs about this podcast and exec leaders, and the biggest fear that they have is to be on the front page of the news, right? And I always say to them, why don't you flip it? Why don't you get on the front page of the news for a good reason? And why don't you do things and start things, not be scared of things, to get on the front page of the news?
Great question.
Yeah, could not agree more. I think, I've had that experience of, where we have, questions, and where we're sort of put in situations like select committee where we have to answer questions. And I think, what I've said to the team is, let's flip that and think about what stories we want to tell, because there's such a focus on what's been done wrong and what hasn't gone right. But actually, there's a whole lot of great stuff. We want to tell those stories. So we have to flip our mindset about that. And I think that's a really great challenge for all of us, in government particularly, to do better at telling our stories that are good.
We as leaders are storytellers. We paint the narrative of what the future strategy can be, and then we help people to see that, that vision of ours, and find these people to get on the bus with us. And so storytelling externally is so important. Yeah,
and we talk about, there's such a narrative about the media is always looking for problems, but maybe we need to serve them up something good to tell, that's on us.
No,
yeah.
100%.
I think also what you said is we also really control that narrative, right? And it is how you frame things. And everything that we've all done have got us to where we are today. So that's something a mentor had shared with me that I'm really focusing on at the moment is, you can look at things like part of our strategy at Humankind is actually really drawing on a lot of our original roots now from, the early days. But actually, you can look at it like that of we're going back a little bit to the early days, but actually everything that we've done has built us up to here. And in the last few years, we've really been building this culture, the proposition, and really the operations and the machine to be able to take this platform to the next level.
Yeah, that's your foundations.
In the rearview mirror, it's what is that narrative, and back to the storytelling.
You mentioned mentors a couple of times, which is good because I wanted to touch on this. I've been CEO of a few companies and before my own, and I think it's a little bit easier in your own company personally. Sorry. One thing I've found is it's quite lonely to be a CEO. It's you're constantly in your head thinking about problems, and you're outside of your team thinking about things. You don't want to give. Like, we carry a lot of the weight and pressures and stress, and you want to shield your team from a lot of that stress, and so you do tend to keep yourself a little bit distant from people. But how do you share that, and how do you learn? And so do you all have mentors or groups where you can be more vulnerable and be yourselves in?
KP and I are part of a group of chief executive women, so that's a place where you can kind of talk to other people who've got similar experiences.
I've heard about this group.
Yeah.
I was talking to someone recently who
it's
was
powerful.
like, it's my favourite moment where I can just go, oh.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think about it as reflection. I'm an extrovert, so for me, reflecting is often, through the medium of talking to somebody else, and that is really helpful. So talking to someone who's in a similar situation, who can relate but isn't in your organisation, can be a really great way of enabling reflection, and just having somebody else who understands. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you might want to speak to it too, KP, in terms of your experience of the group.
Completely agree. For me, it's like an essential ingredient. I think the biggest challenge and like recipe for success as a CEO or leader is managing your own psychology. And that's really important for a number of reasons, to be able to make the right decisions and lead the company, to like keep well yourself. And there's so many angles, right? Like being aware of your strengths, how to leverage those, weaknesses, blind spots, worldviews, all of those things. To me, one of the number one ways to do that is have friends, peer mentors, right? That not only will support you, it's not so much just about support, it's also really like awareness and challenge and different perspectives, like public sector, private sector. There's so much that we can learn from each other. Coaches, cornerstone habits that keep you really resilient and well.
It's critical.
Yeah.
A couple thoughts on that for me. I'm involved in a couple of kind of CEO cohort groups. One of my shareholders, they have a group of companies they've invested in that are kind of impact companies, and they're great. I mean, they're just such a good challenge around, are we focused and driving the right impact in the business, and that's great. And then I'm also doing the Morgo CEO training cohort thing, which is fantastic because we can just have real conversations. The one gap I've got at the moment is Wellington, in terms of a good CEO group in Wellington that doesn't have to meet on a Zoom call, but you can actually meet over a coffee and have a chat. Yeah. And I feel like it's easier for women in these groups to get together and just instantly be fruitful. With guys, I think it's a bit harder, and so. And maybe this is a plug, Troy, for something that you can help with. Like, is there a Wellington
Matt
thing?
Hayter is doing something from Project Works, was doing something in that space, trying to get people together in Wellington. But
great. Yeah. Something with a theme, because guys need themes.
Yeah, 100%.
I really agree. I've had this conversation with a number of male CEOs, and we were saying, he's like, yeah, I need this. I was like, I've got that. And we're like, I think women are better at it than
women are 100%
men,
better at it.
Right?
Yeah. And women are 100% better about being vulnerable.
Totally.
Good dudes will get together and be like, nailing it, yep, nailing it, yep, nailing it, yep, no problems, no.
Yeah.
And then you go home and cry.
Yeah.
But and that's probably like the one thing that I wish that someone had shared with me, or just I'm slow to the party. It took me a while to realize, is like, oh yeah, that is a big part of the job, is like managing your frame of mind, like keeping in the game, keeping resilient, keeping well. And so
important.
Yeah, those mentoring and those habits are just so critical.
I think it's really interesting that, because, I'm not suggesting that it's like being an athlete, but I try and think about it like, you have to be performing a lot in a CEO role. So you have to think about managing your energy to perform. And yeah, like you said, cornerstone habits, what are the things that you do? I don't know, do you guys have things that you do, your non-negotiables, your kind of cornerstone habits that keep you, on track?
I think your athlete analogy is a spot on one, because if we're not getting sleep, a good diet, limited alcohol, all that stuff, we perform poorly. And it's just like an athlete.
What about you, Pavan? How do you keep yourself?
Look, I've got it wrong in the past. So code was pretty pretty brutal, right? Like delivering a whole bunch of government contracts around the world was pretty brutal whilst pivoting the company out of a hole. So I did not look after myself, and I probably didn't do a great job looking after the team as well that was really leaning into this big problem. So I came out of Rush and I had to take about a year off. And as I became a stay-home dad for a bit. I did some governance work, some consulting work, but I probably worked no more than 15, 20 hours a week over the time. And I transformed my mind and body as well. So I became fully plant-based. I took up meditation, a bit of yoga. I lost about 22 kgs. I did my first triathlon.
Awesome.
And these days I always have a race in the calendar of some sort. I kind of try and work up between 5 and 10 hours a week. And that's pretty important. And my team at work see that. That they see me slip into my running gear and go for a lunchtime run. They see me kind of coming to work all sweaty because I've commuted on a run or a bike. And it's important to lead by example, that unless you look after yourself, you can't look after each other and your customers. So now I really believe in it. And I do often fall off the horse. No one's perfect. And it's important to kind of have that advisory board around you that's gonna pull you out of that hole. So I've got a men's group that I'm part of. And coming back to your other question about actually how do you, it's lonely, so how do you get support? I think of it as almost like a self-curated board of advisors. And some of these people that I often have a catch-up with have no idea they're on my board of advisors, right? But I know I'll go to XYZ for a strategy problem that I'm confronted with, or someone else or a people or culture problem that I'm confronted with. And that's pretty important, because the moment you label someone as a mentor, they might actually feel the weight on their shoulders, so you don't actually want to... Exactly. Maybe. But I definitely agree that self-care is probably your number one goal, because unless you turn up as your whole self in a wholesome way, you're not going to be able to do the job.
I think that's a really good segue into my next question, but this is a really interesting topic, right? And the question is there a failure or setback that you now see as an invaluable lesson? And I think not necessarily a failure or a setback, but like burning yourself out to then getting to the point where you realize now I have to protect myself going forward is such a good lesson. And so I wanted to throw that out to the table. Is there a moment where you had a failure or a setback and it's prompted you to change and given you so much of a better platform now going forward?
Previously, I was in an acting country manager role, and I did that for about 10 months while they were recruiting, and also kind of put my hat in the ring for the role, but didn't get it. And that then kind of, that's setback, you might want to call it a setback, made me think really carefully about then applying for my current role, because that was again going to be an opportunity to be an acting chief executive and then think about applying for the role. What that first experience taught me was how to approach doing that again. And I had heard a really interesting piece of advice about that, which is when you're in an acting role, don't drive the car like you borrowed it, drive the car like you stole it. And I quite liked that as a piece of advice to think, just go for it when you're in an acting role, because this is your opportunity to show what you would do, and don't hold back. So, that helped.
I love that take. Don't drive the car like you borrowed it, drive the car like you stole it, go out and get the role. Yeah. It really is. An acting role is just the longest interview process ever, right?
It sure is, which can be an advantage or a massive disadvantage, and you have to turn it into an advantage.
How did you turn it into an advantage? How did you drive it like you stole it?
I went into it knowing, wanting to show what I would bring to the role if I did it. And Pavan mentioned earlier relationships. That was my kind of thing that I wanted to bring to the role to do differently. The organisation had feedback that we weren't as connected with our regulated participants as we could be. And so the opportunity for me was to get out there and build those relationships and show that that's what I would bring to the role. And I did.
Is there a time that you can recall, Trent, like something that really made you reflect and think, and then it's changed your role or your life?
Yeah, and I alluded to this a little bit at the beginning. I had a fintech startup years ago, and not the smartest thing, but I was working full time and also getting the startup off the ground. And so just, working crazy hours and not taking care of myself. And because it was exhilarating. It was so much fun. We were growing really, really fast. We'd partnered with a bank and we were going. And probably 2 years into it, I came down with meningitis. And those of you who don't know what that is, it's inflammation of the brain, and you get basically hardcore migraines and nausea for, months on end. Anyway, I got to a point where I just had to step down and hand over the reins. And, overall there was an outcome where we had an exit and it all worked out. But it just showed me that I didn't take care of myself. I wasn't listening to my body. I wasn't listening to people around me saying, you're going to implode. And I did. Fortunately, I learned a lot through that process and then kind of bounced from that into my next startup. And I'm like, no, this time I'm not going to do anything else except for this startup and make sure that I really take care of myself. So, then started prioritizing sleep, prioritizing me time and recharge time. And I've just found without that, I'm just not nearly as effective as I can be. Yeah.
I had an interesting conversation the other day with the chief exec at Sky, Sophie Maloney. Hi, Sophie. Thank you for this. Full credit to this thought. And it was with her and one of New Zealand's great Olympians, Sarah Cowley-Ross. And we were talking about performance and culture. And we were talking about the similarities between sports and corporate life, but then also the differences. And where we got to is one of the key differences is that, corporate life is an infinite game, whereas sports, like you go for the event and then you win. So, athletes, like we really said, it's like the corporate athlete. You rest, you recover, you've got a whole team. But at work is the game keeps going. The game is every day, right? So you kind of have to have your peaks and flows, and you have to have your habits and your daily march and your rest and everything. And I'm still really thinking about that mindset, and it's really helping me. And that's where, again, I think the power of the team is that you have to be able to rely on others in those times too.
I think another thing that we've started doing, have been consistent about it, which is pausing and celebrating. So we just started at end of each quarter, let's pause each team and just show up with a drink, virtual, because we're a virtual team, and celebrate what you're proud of for the month, what you learned, and actually pause, because we found that we were just hamster wheels, all of us. Nothing ever stopped, and there's almost this kind of weight on the team until we started doing that.
I brought in something similar where as a leadership team every week we spend a few minutes talking about what went well last week. Immediately you've done something that went well, and then you move on to the next thing. And if you don't reflect, you don't learn from that as well. Not just what didn't go well, but you learn a lot from what did go well so that you want to repeat that.
When we're thinking about CEOs, right, and if there's a lot of people out there saying, I want to be the CEO, and I'm like, good luck, be careful what you wish for. But it's a fantastic role where, you're in a really privileged and fortunate position a lot of the time. There's a lot of time, that we do have a lot of stress and pressure, and I thank everyone for being really honest about that. I'm really passionate about this topic. But if you, is there one piece of advice that you would say, this is something I would tell the next CEO that would be taking over from me, or someone I'm mentoring now to become a CEO?
I think anybody that wants to become a CEO inherently has a big ego. And ego's not bad. It's just, we take these roles for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons, I think, is, you have a position of power. So I think having the why is really, really important. So if you just want to be a CEO to make a lot of money, I don't think you'd be successful. You might make some money, but you're not going to build a sustainable, enduring company. So if your why is, you want to build great teams, you want to build great tech, you want to, take something amazing from New Zealand and scale it to the world, just being super clear on the why, I think is really, really important before the person gets into the role. Or I think they'll get into the role and they'll struggle because that's not solid for them.
So do you need to take a role where you appreciate and understand the why? Or can you just take any CEO role and then figure out the why along the way?
I've had 4 CEO roles up to this point, and the first 2 were mainly financially focused, and we got the business to a point, but wasn't able to really build it sustainable after that. The third one we were able to get sustainable, and this one is now on track for that as well. I think this is probably my first role where the why has really gotten into my heart around really wanting to do good for the world's oceans and make a difference. And that was a real shift for me. And then when that shift happened, it became A, a lot more enjoyable, but B, I could just really project my vision out a lot farther because I could see it.
I really agree. I think there's a level of everything that you've just said. And if we can get into flow, right, like where we're feeling like we're at a point where we're making a difference and doing what we're good at, that's absolutely like where we're all doing our best work, including our teams. I think the biggest advice for me is kind of what we touched on is like nobody really says that managing your frame of mind is the biggest thing, and nobody really says everyone feels the same or a lot of people feel the same as you. It's easy to kind of sit there thinking like, oh, this is really hard, or man, the roller coaster each day, like the highs are so high, and then there's real challenges. And then when you realize that you're not the only one feeling like that, you can go back to first principles, create some frameworks for that, and then be able to really move through it. And to me, like that is the hardest part, and that is absolutely like where I find the most personal growth and the most satisfaction.
And it's crazy that the amount of CEOs that are interviewed that struggle with imposter syndrome, it's like, I don't remember the stats, but it's like 60 to 80%. And that's just such an encouraging stat.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Yeah, exactly.
CEOs are the worst interviewers ever. Like they're terrible at interviewing for roles, like really terrible. And a lot of them like just, you know, they're like, I'm faking it. I'm not doing the right job. And I'm like, Jesus, it's really crazy. But then a lot of them are really amazing narcissists who are really good at, you know, telling you how great they are as well. And so you get that, I think, the fine line of like, if you are doing something for the good of it or you're doing something for the perceived power, you know, Frank Underwood styles.
I think the understanding's changing too. Like one of the challenges that I first felt was I felt like you have to be good at everything, or people expect you to be good at everything.
Yeah.
My view, I'd love to know what you all think, is like, actually we, or at least I, am only actually really, really good at one or two things, just like everyone else. And so like we said, it's about like knowing what those things are, leveraging those strengths, and then really building the team around you on your actual team at work or your advisors, et cetera. But that I think there's growing awareness that that's not the case, but I definitely still feel that. That's definitely still in my mind. What do you all think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you know, you probably won't be able to do any other job in the business at a certain point in time. You may be able to do one or two other jobs, but to have that ability to kind of lead others to do their jobs really well is probably your number one job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And kind of to your point, Troy, you know, what advice I might give to a new CEO would be start building your legacy on day one. Be really clear when you think in your own head the job will be done. And have the humility to step aside when you've achieved those, or even really evaluate whether you should continue in the role, because that role's not going to be forever, and it's kind of you're writing the chapter of the company's book that will have your stamp on it. So be very clear what that looks like.
It kind of comes back to that point too about you can be a really great potential CEO, but it's also about the timing and what the company needs, and that's that thing about bringing your strengths to bear, because you may not be the right CEO for this time in this organisation, and knowing that, it's a bit like knowing the why, but it's probably the more personal piece about what it is you bring, and is that the right thing that the organisation needs right now? And if it's not, maybe it's not the right time for you in this company.
What's the difference between, like, in your point of view, Sarah, that from being a senior leader or a leader to stepping up to a CEO? Talk someone through what that jump looks like.
It obviously depends a little bit on what your role is in senior leadership. So, for example, I've kind of done that jump twice, once on an acting basis, and both times I'd been in a legal role first. And so obviously a legal role is not very outwardly focused. So for me, the thing I had to really supercharge was the external relationships, because you may not be as well known if you've done a role that isn't so outwardly focused, you may not be as well known externally. That may not be the thing that everybody needs to work on. It's going to be different for everyone in terms of the role they're coming into. I suppose I think about, you know, there's a whole load of things that you've got to do. There's the internal piece and then there's the external piece. So the step up for me was about thinking, what were my strengths to build on, but what were the things that I had to gain some ground in that I didn't have.
If we were building a company now at this table, right? And so we were like, all right, we're starting a company because now we all know each other well, we respect each other. We're like, yeah, we can do this. And I'm Captain ADHD, so I probably will. What are the things that you, from your learnings now, if you're building a company today, that we should focus on early?
Well, I'm going to go with something in HR because there's 2 HR specialists at the table. Now, in all seriousness,
there's one, and there's a dodgy recruiter guy.
That's my team. Yeah, it's not me.
obviously we need to find something where there's an unmet need or a need that can be met in a better way, and do enough work to validate that, yeah, that need does exist. There's an opportunity to get in and disrupt it and change it and come in with a better product. And do enough work to actually go out and validate practically, so with an MVP or something to say, yep, there's some legs here. And then from there, as we've been talking about, what's the broader market opportunity? Get clarity that can we just sell it in New Zealand or can we sell it globally, and just have a sense of, yep, this can be X size business. And then from there, how might we attack it? How are we going to position against competitors? What do our sales and distribution channels look like? All those kind of basics. Create basically a vision. Here's a 3-year perspective of where we want to be. Here's all the elements that we need to have in place. And then over the next 12 months, these are the things we're going to be doing on a quarter-by-quarter basis to help.
Can you do the 3-year vision, like as an early stage startup? Should you do the 3-year vision?
Well, I think you need to, because without it, you're just going to stop, start. And there's so many, with a new business, so many new opportunities come in. You might have a customer that isn't an ideal customer that comes in and says, I'll pay you some money to do something, and it just takes you over here. It's that balance between a 12-month action plan that everybody's completely aligned around and executing on, and the 3-year strategy, the 3-year vision. If you don't have that 3-year vision, you'll do this. And so I think both is really, really important. So once you kind of have that in place, and obviously along the way you're getting good people on the bus, getting people that are aligned with that vision, that you can then get out and execute effectively. So vision, good understanding of the market need, how you can meet that need better than somebody else, and then aligning the team around a plan that you can execute on rapidly.
Pavan, interested in your thoughts on that. Do you see the same? Is there anything else that you'd think about differently, knowing what you know now?
Be very clear around what people will join you in that first year. It's critical. I mean, the number of startups I've worked with previously that failed because they got the chemistry wrong, and they were really hyper-focused on the customer and the product and revenue, but they didn't have the chemistry, and they didn't focus on that, and they didn't build that, and the thing falls apart. So one of the gigs I did previously was doing venture capital, and I looked at probably 150 companies from an investment pipeline perspective, and a lot of these companies had like early dead weight shares on the cap table, which was basically founders that fall out with each other. So if we were starting a company tomorrow, I would over-amplify that. What is it that each one of us bring? Why we are coming to this table? How long are we in it for? What does success look like? And all of those things will be really different. Can you live with those differences or not? And have those conversations early. One of the local companies that I really like, who I think did that in the early days, is Sharesies, right? Like they had 7 or so co-founders, and they probably had a really honest conversation very early, and they evaluated that, and that's why they came out the other end, irrespective of product or market.
Yeah, they had a really great conversation. Yeah, I've heard that story a few times about the conversation and about what they wanted the company to be and what they each wanted to contribute from early days. And so,
just to riff off what you're saying, which I fully agree, and I've actually got that wrong in the past, where I hired friends with good skills, and in the end it blew up because our values were misaligned, and they actually weren't as good at their skills as they needed to be for the business. And the big learning there was, they don't need to be friends, but we need to have good value alignment, and they actually need to be experts at what they do as we grow. And that was a big learning for me.
One of the biggest things I want to talk to you about, KP, is like you early days, right? You've got that, you've done really well. We've pulled this table around. We've all got the right people on the bus. We're all working around this one table. The culture is really strong. All of a sudden, Trent says, we're moving to North America. Not Canada, but the States. And then we're setting up a team over there, and then the culture starts changing a little bit, right? And things start, like fractures start coming into that original early days culture. And so how, as a leader, do you scale a culture?
It's been said many times before, this isn't anything profound, but I absolutely believe it starts with us and our leadership teams absolutely modeling those behaviors. And then that becomes that's quite easy when you've got a 10-person team or a 20-person team or a 40-person team. And then when you've got hundreds or thousands on your team, you really need to codify it. And actually, I really believe it's quite important to codify it with the 10 or 20 if you're working remotely, right? And now with more distributed ways of work. That is baking those behaviors, values, and just behaviors and key cultural tenets right into the ways of working, the rituals, the systems. And so whether that be, obviously we all hire, right, for culture fit and culture add, but then onboarding right off the bat, what are those key, again, cultural tenets, and how do you bring those to life? When you're assessing performance, is it also based on values and cultural tenets? Who gets promoted? Where do pay increases go? And then even on a daily basis or weekly or monthly basis, what gets celebrated? What gets recognized? What gets walked past? What is absolutely sacred? That's really how you scale culture.
Do you tell people what the culture is going to be, what you want it to be, or do you just try and get it there?
There can be a conception around like generally what a good culture is and not a good culture is. But really, the culture has to fit the strategy of the organization. So the extreme example would be like Meta, move fast and break things, high innovation, absolutely essential, right? So fail fast, learn. Boeing, move fast and break things, no thank you. Doesn't work.
I think that's what they're currently doing, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Doing very well at that.
It's not working. Nailing it. Operating, right? Surgeon, operating room. That's not the culture that you want in there. Absolute precision, low risk tolerance. So it really needs to fit, and that needs to be deliberate. And as your strategy changes, some of that needs to change as well.
Yeah.
I really like what you said there, because as the business grows from an idea to a startup to a scale up to a substantial business, especially when you're going offshore, what might be enduring is your purpose. But your values can change over time, your culture can change over time, and your point about zeroing that back to the strategy and getting really clear at those inflection points when they're shifting to the next level. A lot of businesses don't do that, and they think, well, what got us here is will get us to the next level with our culture, and then the wheels start to fall off. So I think it's just being intentional at those gates of growth and making sure that it's fit for purpose.
I think so. And like ask your people. So again, like asking our clients, our customers, and then ask your team. We just last week went to a group of our team. It's like, where are the misalignments, right? And really valuable feedback. Okay. Yeah, I think I'm pretty in touch, and like so much good new that came from that. So just constantly speaking to our clients and our team.
It's also why it's when you do kind of evolve your strategy, why it's harder than people might think to get things to change, because you are also doing culture change, and that can take time. And so, I think people can underestimate how much effort that will be. And I think as a chief executive, that is the thing that we have to spend a lot of time on, and probably underestimate how much time.
The topical role that I'm getting a lot at the moment is the chief of staff role. A lot of people are coming to me and saying, hey, I'm thinking about getting a chief of staff. Can you talk me through like the pros and cons and that type of person? And so I wanted to ask you about that. Like, is there a role in your business that you're like, they fundamentally are my left hand or right hand and I need them by my side? And do you have is there like a chief of staff type person that you work with?
I haven't got a chief of staff. I don't plan to.
You don't plan to say?
No, and not because I strongly agree or disagree with that role. It's just that I've been lucky enough that in the roles that I've done at the top table, there's been someone from my leadership team that has filled that role, and it's not necessarily the same person. It could be, you could pass that role around. So it's a hat that someone wears versus it's someone's job description.
Yeah.
But I agree. If you have a lieutenant that you can be that person that allows you to kind of be a sounding board as well as be that conduit to drive strategic change, it could be beneficial.
I've got a sort of a version of that, probably not a chief of staff. Every year I go away with my university girlfriends for a girls' weekend, and last year when we went away I was talking about the pressure and how I was struggling to keep up with some stuff, and one of them has a kind of a role like that. She's an executive advisor, and she said, you need someone like what I do for my boss. And so I did a trial of it, and it has worked really well, having an executive advisor who kind of is a bit like a left hand, can pick up some things that come up that I just haven't got time to get to, and can do a really good job of knowing what I need and how I might approach dealing with those things to a point that then I can get involved. It has been really effective, but I think I quite like what you're saying, Pavan, too, about potentially that some of those things can move around depending on what it is that you need. And I guess a really strong leadership team around you can provide whatever kind of support you really need.
I don't think we're ready yet for a chief of staff for me. And it's funny, in New Zealand, it's probably a role that's not as respected as it needs to be, because I've seen a lot of successful ones in the US. But what I have identified that I need more of, I've got a really good finance manager who's gotten us to this point, but now as we're growing, we're looking at our Series A next year. I need a much stronger CFO along my side. And so we're just in the process of recruiting that person. And that I'm really wanting to kind of leverage that person to not only do the CFO side, but also to kind of be my wingman or wing woman, depending on who it is, to support me going forward.
I think it's a totally underutilized role in New Zealand. I see it used more just through my lens in the US, but broader in North America. So yeah, I see this as an opportunity that we can really unlock. I don't personally run an organization the size where I think it warrants it, but huge potential. My one kind of initial thought on it is you can look at it in different ways. It's different than like an executive assistant or someone that's just coordinating, and I've seen it fall into that trap. It's someone who really understands business outcomes, the operations that are really required to scale a business, and can just be an absolute asset.
The way I've been recruiting a few of them recently, and the way I've been describing it is to people that like don't really know, because I get a call, would you consider a chief of staff role? And they're like, what's that? I'm like, well, let's imagine it's a co-CEO role, and you kind of work out where both of your strengths and weaknesses are, and you rely on each other's strengths, and then so you're taking almost some of the remit of that CEO role, and you're a little bit more, internal in the business sort of facing to allow the CEO to be a little bit more visionary, etc. And so, yeah, it's I think it's a phenomenal role, and I think what CEOs need to do more of is share the responsibilities, with their teams. And so, how do you prepare the next wave?
We joke about, what it means to be given an opportunity, because, often there are opportunities that, you maybe don't really want, but...
You'd just accidentally leave your keys in the car, wouldn't you? Steal it, go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I think it is about, looking for those things. I think you're exactly right. There are so many components of the role, some of which were a bit of a surprise to me. And so making sure that you are giving other people those opportunities, I think, what you're talking about in terms of a CFO who can also be your wing person, that means letting them do the bits that are core that you need from them, but also giving them some of those bits of your job to have a crack at sometimes. And then that means that if, you're unavailable or you're on holiday, somebody else is fully equipped to step in, not just, of holding the keys, but doesn't know how to drive it. Yeah.
Oh shit, this is a manual.
Yeah, that's right.
And someone who's also not afraid to call you out, privately or in a team around, hey, we think, or I think you're not thinking about this enough, or you're not, showing up in this way. Yeah.
That's right. If you hold too much of the role within yourself and don't let other people see or try those other opportunities, they will be less able to call you out or challenge you or give you the really important feedback that you might need.
What's been your lowest moment in your CEO roles specifically?
For me, it's like the absolute highs are the team and the people. I'm obsessed with our team. And so with that also comes the lows. And I think it's really apt, like coming out of this market, when we have to let people go and the impact on people's lives. Like for me, I personally feel that acutely, and we've talked about earlier in this conversation, at the end of the day, it's our accountability. Everything comes down to us. Sometimes make a joke. It's like someone came to pick up our towels to clean and there was a mix up with it, and it's like, it's kind of my fault. And it was only funny because it's kind of not true, but it's actually true. And so when it comes to really impacting people's roles, that is really hard. And you're having those conversations and the person and their family situation and all of those things. And the reality is for them, it's probably not the best thing. but in pursuit of the purpose and what's best for the whole team and all of the stakeholders, it is the right thing. And it's making those hard calls. And yeah, I find that really hard. And that's where the all of those support networks kind of come in place.
Have you read the book The Hard Thing About Hard Things?
The struggle.
Such a great book.
And it's like what you want to do in those situations is then go to the bar or hide or whatever, right? But what you have to do is actually front to the team and be available and be present and walk that person, to the door when they're leaving that day and everything. And that's hard.
My lowest moment was end of December this last year. So we'd just raised some capital and we got the money in December 23rd. So it's just before the holidays. And we had about 2 months of runway left. And then, we're going to have to lay off a whole bunch of people. Part of the deal was we had to cut some immediate costs, which meant a couple of individuals. Actually, it was more than that, but we negotiated a couple of individuals. So we spent a year raising, getting us to a point where we could get out of the mess we were in and actually set ourselves up for amazing growth. But then finish that and at the same time had to immediately lay people off and then tell the team about it. And like all of the excitement
at Christmas time,
and all the excitement vaporized. And it was just all about this horrible decision that I'd made to get rid of 2 people right before Christmas. It's just like the worst thing ever. But you're right. It's the greater good. It's keeping 25 other people employed, doing great work going forward, keeping the business alive. So you do have to make these tough calls that knowing that people have families to go home to, they're not going to have a job over Christmas. So that was low.
Yeah, it's probably a couple of times in my career where I've taken a punt on someone and they haven't worked out in the bigger role that I've taken a punt on. And that process was really disheartening because I wish it would have. And I always look back and could I have done something differently? Could I have intervened earlier? Did I make a wrong decision? So that's what I hope I learned from and kind of navigate more appropriately in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I echo all of those. I think particularly, downsizing, which I've had to do in a previous role, that is hard for all the reasons that you guys have talked about. But I do think it's probably a little bit of what you said too, Pavan, that you also kind of ask yourself as a leader, did I do something wrong? Did I contribute? And I think that is important as leaders, that when things don't go right or when someone doesn't perform well, it's not just on them. We should ask ourselves, did we not set them up for success? Did we not do some things right along the way as well? If you do ask yourself that question, then you do feel the pain of any of those things that don't quite work out.
It's a really good point you raise. And there's a great book I read years ago called Extreme Ownership by this ex-Navy SEAL. But the whole premise of the book was exactly what you said. If your salespeople fail, it's your fault because you didn't train them effectively.
Yeah.
If something else fails, it's your fault because you didn't get your ducks in a row. It all goes back to you, which puts a lot of pressure on, but it also empowers you to make sure that you're putting all those things in place.
I think that's right. I haven't read the book, but I would say that without having read it, that I am all about extreme ownership, because you have to. I often say your fingerprints will be on there somewhere, both the success and the failure.
I completely agree, and am reminded all the time, our role, or I see my role, like it is our team's performance. That's my performance. Is the team's performance.
While we're on the topic of books, what's one book that's changed your life, that's like as a leader or as a person? Is there a book that you go, that's such a great book? The Hard Thing About Hard Things was such a great book, because I remember thinking that I never lent into things. And there were so many times in my career that I look back and I go, I knew that was going to be a problem, because I remember thinking at the time, I'm not sure how this is going to go. And then bang, it went poorly because I didn't go into it. And so it was just a good book at the right time for me. But yeah, is there any other book in particular that you can reflect on?
Probably 2 come to mind for me. The first book was written many years ago. It was when I was employee number 1 in a startup as my first job in my career. It was Crossing the Chasm by Geoffrey Moore. And he's the one who came up with, everything is a bell curve. There's an early majority and a late majority, and how do you cross that chasm? And as employee number 1 in the startup during the .com bubble and burst process, it was the playbook with which we built our business, and it was awesome to kind of
great book.
Kind of take that forward. And the second one was Playing to Win.
That's good.
And I just stepped into a strategy role. That book came out And it was, again, transformational for how I think about strategy.
The base book for me is the Bible. There's a lot of great truths in there, and a lot of the success books are kind of built on those principles. So that's a key one for me. We mentioned extreme ownership, which, again, the transformational thing there was it's all on me as the success of this business. And then just recently, just back to the broader balance in life, Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. I don't know if you guys read it. So good. Like my whole physical and mental and sleep life is transformed because of this book, and I feel so much better.
I read a lot, but I probably read more fiction.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Like, I think
Terrible.
there's definitely, like, I always say to people, like, there's, like, you have moments where it's either a person or it's a blog or it's a book or something that sort of, really pushes you. But, do you have one, KB?
Yeah, I can add a couple to that list that I really agree with. $1 Trillion Coach by Bill Campbell.
Yeah, great book.
And then Belonging by Owen Eastwood, who is a New Zealander who whakapapa's back to New Zealand, but lives in the UK and is a high-performance sports athlete. He was part of the All Blacks coaching team, but really draws in the principles of teamship that draws on Te Ao Māori values, and absolutely love it and live by it.
I asked you about your lowest point. I want to get your highest point now. Like, talk to me about what was your F year moment that you were like, I can't believe I achieved that, or we achieved that as a team. I mean, your COVID stuff was exceptional.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Yeah.
So going from an idea through to launching an app to all Kiwis in about 8 weeks was just a ride. And over the course of that, so the high-fi moment didn't come until probably a year into that journey when New Zealand, we didn't have the vaccine in the community deployed yet, and we had Delta in the community, and we sent 187,000 people notifications in the 4 weeks of that lockdown, saying, hey, you may have been exposed, please go get tested and isolate. And I think that helped clamp the virus spread. So that was really good. And the other high-fi moment related to that, it's some of the work we did with the UK government. Some of the results were published in the Nature journal about how effective some of these technologies were. So little wee New Zealand company played a little wee role in getting published in the Nature journal. So that was pretty special.
That's a good moment. Yeah.
Well done.
Hard to follow that.
Yeah, done.
Yeah. No, anyone else want to try and follow that? Anyone got a good moment?
So I had a fintech that I've mentioned a couple times, and we went from just an idea on paper. It was actually interesting. I was working for a bank in the UK who was being disrupted, and they identified that this concept would be great for them, but big corporate, they could never get off the ground. So I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. Back to New Zealand, did it myself. But we really quickly were able to get Xero to partner with us as a distribution channel and as an integration partner. And so, small business could go online and really quickly get a credit score and get cash in the bank the same day for cash flow lending. So good for recruiting businesses. And within 6 months, we had that up and running, and it was just like this really crappy back end full of plasters, and it looked horrible, but the front end looked great. And we were able to start transacting, and we got a line from the bank, and so we're doing about $2 million a month, in lending to small businesses with just half a dozen of us trying to figure out what to do. And it just got to that point, it's like, wow, I've got a real business, even though it just looks horrible and we still have no idea what we're doing. And then it started going from there. So it just made me really proud what we could accomplish that quickly.
That's why I love startups so much. It's like the duck on the lake analogy, right?
Yeah.
It looks so great, but you have no idea how hard it is when it's underwater.
That's right. Yeah.
KB, do you have one?
Oh, like no surprises for me. It's completely all about the people. Like when we do get that opportunity to step back and reflect, and you've like really backed someone or challenged someone to go beyond what they thought they could do, and then you see them out there like completely owning it. We've got a member of our team right now who is like really been like pushing in terms of how she's working with senior stakeholders. And we work with one of New Zealand's big hospices and did this incredible EX transformation project that she really pushed herself on. And now it's up for being shared with Hospice New Zealand around how, they really run like employee experience across the country. That was completely her, right? And so it's those moments, or you look back and see like previous members of the team 15 years ago that you really kind of took that punt on, and they continue to progress. Like those are those where you look back and yes, go you.
All right, so I'm going to have to get one out of you now.
Obviously, the current climate and government is pretty tough in terms of funding. And as an organisation, we identified, a year and a half ago that for us to really deliver on what we need to deliver on, we did need some additional funding, but tough in this climate. We worked really hard on going through and explaining, what we would need additional funding for and what we would do with it. And we were recently successful in being able to increase our levy, which is a huge endorsement for my team of the work we put into demonstrating why we need it. And we are incredibly grateful and feel very privileged to have been able to do that in this environment.
So legacy for me is a question that I ask a lot on podcasts, and it's a hard question to answer, and so I ask it for that very reason. But what do you want your legacy to be, both for your current company or companies that you work at, and then also for, just in general, your life?
Yeah, so Flick is in an interesting spot at the moment. So we were the fastest growing energy retailer last year. We're growing really well at the moment, but we're part of a bigger integrated energy conglomerate run out of Australia. So my legacy as CEO is to help Flick transition from just a New Zealand focused single brand business to a multi-brand, multi-geography business, and more integrated and partnered within a larger group. And if I can take a whole bunch of Wellingtonians or Kiwis who've joined Flick as an awesome brand and actually get them believing into this bigger mission of transitioning hydrocarbon-based business and a whole bunch of customers out of oil and into electricity, and build their careers, that would be an awesome legacy to leave behind as chief executive of Flick, potentially a last chief executive at Flick. So that'd be awesome. And my legacy that I'd love to leave in New Zealand is to help us get out of primary industries and get into technology and kind of really grow a backbone economy which relies on exporting great tech to the world to solve some big problems. And if I can play a small role in that, I'd die a happy man.
I think
That's
you are,
great.
right?
You are awesome. Yeah, happy to go next. I think my legacy within the organisation, I want to be that we can change and be different as a government entity. We can work differently and enable different outcomes and deliver for consumers in a different way. And I think that, to help the organisation understand that they can be different, and, that would make me really happy. Personally, sort of connected to that, what I would like to leave is that idea that you can, that government and business, can learn from each other, and that you can move between one and the other, because we need to work together to be able to, help New Zealand grow and develop. And so I'd like to break down that us and them between government and business, and I guess because I've personally shifted between, it's important.
For my current role, the legacy I'd like to leave is to help scale the impact we're making in the Pacific all over the world. So reducing illegal fishing, reducing crime at sea, and we do that here in the Pacific. And there's been so many amazing stories that come out of that. But how can we scale that in North America and other parts of the world? So that's really what the next few years holds for me. And related to that is, how do we create a sustainable financial business that can continue to drive that impact? We can't just have an NGO that does some impact but runs out of money and we die. It needs to be a sustainable business. So it's twofold: sustainable plus driving impact. So that's the big focus for me in the role. And then personally, I'd like to have on my epitaph that everything Trent did, he did with integrity. So my kids would say that, my wife would say that, my suppliers, my customers, my employees would say that, and I don't always get that right. But that's what a legacy I'd love to strive for.
We are bringing humanity to work across Aotearoa, and really excited about being able to scale that to other countries around the world, and our team are really excited about that. And for me personally, really proving that organizations with the highest levels of humanity are the most commercially successful ones.
it's really important for me that in New Zealand we have local heroes. And it's really important for me that we have people that, if you're lucky enough to ride the elevator up, you send it back down filled with rich information so that the next person rides a lot easier than what we've had. And so for people that come on podcasts, share your wisdom. Like, for people listening right now, like, I usually give a general sense of what the questions might be, and then I change a lot of them because I think it provides fresh thought and conversation. And so for people that come and be brave and caring of their time and like share space, it's fantastic. So thank you so much. We're going to wrap things up with, I'm just going to get you to go around and tell me what your book is going to be. Sarah, I'll start with you. What's the title of your book and what is it?
Always learning. And I think it's about how you can...
That's a strong title.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's about how you can learn from everybody around you, and whatever situation you're in and whatever role you're in, there's always something you can learn.
It might be something like Namaste Aotearoa. As a 90s immigrant kid to this country, I'm like, I feel really integrated, the opportunities that have come to me, and it's going to be a memoir which kind of tells my journey and hopefully provides some insights into what the future looks like for this country.
That's a great title too. This is getting harder now.
The bar's going up.
KV.
Mine would be Ask Your People.
And what is it? What's the book? Is it literally just getting people to like involve their team more?
Yep. Design with. You don't need to know all the answers. And that's your team, that's your clients, that's all of your stakeholders.
I'm going to steal part of your company name because when you asked that question, the first thing that popped into my head was be kind. And business, it's funny, business, there's so many facades that come into business at different levels. There's egos that come into business, but it's refreshing to meet people that are kind in business, be it a supplier or a customer or whoever you're working with. So how can you be consistently kind and transparent and real and not put on these facades and masks that we think we need to have in business? And be great. So yeah, be kind would be my book.
Hey, well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing space. Thank you so much for contributing back to the ecosystem and supporting us. And thanks again.
Thank you.
Kia ora.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. It's such an amazing experience for me to sit around the table with 4 exec leaders, CEOs, CTOs, CEOs, CE, anyone O's. It's just phenomenal to share space with interesting and talented and insightful people. And I think what I hope that this particular episode brings you is the knowledge that anyone can be CEO. There's a lot of learning and different paths that you can come from. You can choose to get to CEO level from different paths along the way. Like, we had culture, we had strategy, we had opportunity. Sarah stole a car. And so, these are people doing amazing things that they've learnt by reading books, pushing themselves into places and throwing themselves into opportunities. And so I hope you learned something from this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. One thing I'd love you to do is just pop down below and just tell me what your favorite moment was. If you're watching this on YouTube, pop it in the comments. If you're watching it in Spotify, jump onto our LinkedIn page, Talent Army Table Talk, and you just pop a comment down under the podcast here and tell us what your favorite thing was. And also tell me which table we should do next. Who should we get around the table next? Provide your thoughts, tag someone below and let me know if you want them on the table. And so until then, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I've been Troy Hammond and you've been watching Table Talk.